So when I was a PTA president at
Yeah.
Brooklyn Tech, our principal said to me that Brooklyn Tech was funded at only 87% of its school's budget. School funding comes from something called fair student funding, which is decidedly unfair. Within this budget system, all of the city schools are funded at a different percentage of what they're supposed to get. So you get a school budget for money per student, for teachers, for the classrooms, for upkeep and all of that.
Oh, so there's a formula that decides how much every
a school
school
is going to get. But then not every school gets 100%. Some schools were getting 82%, some schools were getting 124%.
How do they make that decision?
Well, that was a really good question. So my principal said, I can't get an answer to this. Can you, as a parent, see what's going on? So I went and I spoke to the CFO of the Department of Education and said, how does this work? How come Brooklyn Tech was getting 87%, but the High School for Math, Science, and Engineering was getting 124%? Stuyvesant is getting 98%. You know, this widely disparate funding in city schools. And he basically said, I don't know, rollovers from former funding systems, and that they were supposed to get all this money from Albany. And when they got all this money from Albany, which I think was $24 million or so, they would fund everybody at 100%. The money never came. The budget numbers stayed where they were, and it had been that way for years.
Right.
Years and years and years. So parents took up this cause, and we fought for almost an entire school year in 2016 to bring awareness to this issue, that there were gross differences in schools. Principals didn't know how differently they were funded. So schools in Manhattan were funded higher than schools in other places. Smaller schools were funded higher than bigger schools. So there were schools in Staten Island and in Brooklyn and Queens who were getting 82% of their budgets.
So did you end up getting something?
So we ended up getting something. So at the end of the day, we spoke in front of the panel for educational policy. We spoke in front of the chancellor, Chancellor Farina. We were in the Wall Street Journal and School Book and on NPR. Dozens of parents came and spoke about this. We had a petition with over 7,000 signatures.
So what'd you get?
We got everybody bumped up to 87%.
So schools right now.
All schools had 87% of their budget, which was great. So some schools got a 5% bump. Some schools got nothing.
Did some schools go down?
No. So if you had something, you stayed there. So for the schools that got nothing, so for some schools great, some schools got nothing. The mayor said when he announced this change, which I think was tied into his getting control of the schools back.
Mayoral control back, when the legislature is refusing to
because the governor
renew
said,
it.
We're going to renew you for only 1 year that time, and with that has to come more transparency about school funding. And that's when the mayor said, hey, look at what I'm doing for schools. I'm bumping everybody up to 87%. And I'm going to bump them up to 90% the next year. The next year...
So this would be 2017.
2017, nothing happened. So I reached out to educational reporters to say what happened. I couldn't get an answer from the city, and they said, the mayor said he didn't have the money. That was it. Case done. Everybody's 80% or higher, or 87% or higher. And then suddenly, a week and a half ago, Corey Johnson announced that all schools' funding was being bumped up to 90%. And he and the mayor came out with a press release. So that's great. So now everybody is funded at 90%. There's still some schools who are funded at 98%. There's still some schools funded at 124%. I approached Scott Stringer's office and I said that this is a gross misuse of city funds. Or state funds. Somebody should look into why there's such a wide range. Even now, the difference between 90 and 124 is significant. That's
how much money we're talking about?
Millions of dollars. Millions of dollars.
When we went from 87
to 90.
87 to 90. How much money was that?
$125 million.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money that's being poured into schools. But if you think about
and we're still far from 100, so that would imply that
far from 100, right?
Every 3 percentage points is $125 million.
A big school like Brooklyn Tech, their annual budget is somewhere around $24 million. So they're going to be at 90%. But if they had 100%, that 10% is a significant amount of money.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where did this $125 million mysteriously come from right now? And I'd love to see, when it comes to city schools, more equity. Instead of having everybody be at 90%, which is great, maybe make everybody 92%.
Yeah.
Raise the people who are below, lower the people who are above, and have a little bit of fairness in the system.
Well, this bump up seems to be some pretty big news, and I guess we'll just have to follow it.
It's great news. Yeah, I wish that more people would follow it because people in the system didn't know this was going on.
Well, they're going to know about it now.
Right, is readily available on the DOE's website. You can look up any school and find out what their budget is and what percentage of funding that they're getting. But from school to school, principals had no idea that some were being funded at a really low rate and others would be funded much higher. So they've gotten into the fight now as well.
Well, that
definitely
is-
something to stay on top of. Great news for schools that are getting more money. But for the schools who are still underfunded, it would be even better news if there was an equal playing field.
Well, that is fascinating. Thanks for fighting for that.
Yeah, my pleasure.